The name Bellamy came to England with the ancestors of the Bellamy family in the Norman conquest of 1066. The Bellamy family lived in Shropshire. The name is derived from the Norman French word Bellamy, fair friend, which was used much in the same way in which we now employ good fellow. Before the Industrial Revolution occurred between 1750 and 1850, the majority of the local population were engaged in work related to agriculture. The largest employed section of Burton townsfolk worked on the land. The village in early town had a number of farms very close to the centre. The ag lab was often a family man who lived locally or rented a cottage on the perimeter of the farm. He would have been paid weekly and had fixed hours of employment. There are very few records for this period except for the church entries for births, marriages and deaths, which is where we find the first Bellamy family members on record. Maurice Bellamy, born 1643. John Bellamy, born 1677. Maurice Bellamy, born 1710. Historically, there was no central village, but instead the settlement was divided between a number of hamlets called ends. For example, Upend, Bellend, Woodend and Boxend. The Bellamys lived in the Bellend for the entirety of their time in Kempston. John Bellamy was the first generation to be born in Kempston in 1745. James Bellamy was born in February 1782 in Turvey, Bedfordshire. By the time he'd reached 18, both of his parents had sadly passed away. At the age of 30, James joined the 7th Regiment of Veterans, latterly known as 13th, as a private. The Royal Veteran Battalions were British Army units of the early 19th century that were made up of men no longer fit for frontline service. Between 1802 and 1820, 13 Royal Veteran Battalions were raised, taking into service army pensioners and invalids. Generally, these battalions worked in depots and stores doing administration and support work, which enabled the more able-bodied soldiers to do the fighting. His Majesty's 7th Regiment of Veterans were of Major General Colonel William Raymond as Colonel. These are to certify that James Bellamy, private, in Captain Hutchins' company in the 7th Regiment, aforesaid, born in the parish of Turvey, in or near the town of Turvey, in the county of Bedford, was enlisted at the age of 30 years, and hath served in the 3rd Regiment of the space of 3 years and 0 days, as well as in other corps after the age of 18, according to the following statement, but in consequence of deafness is rendered unfit for further service, and is hereby discharged, having first received all demands of pay, clothing, and from his entry into the said regiment to the date of the discharge, as appears by the receipt of the back hereof, and to prevent any improper use being made of this discharge, by its falling into other hands, come out of the following is the description of the said James Bellamy. He is about 36 years of age, is 5 feet 5.5 inches in height, brown hair, blue eyes, yellow complexion, and by trade a labourman. The following year, in 1817, he married Mary Wooding in Turvey, Bedfordshire, a couple of hours' walk from Kempston, his childhood hometown. They went on to have 5 children, including his eldest child, John Bellamy, born in 1818. James gets into trouble with the law in his latter years. The first time on record is when James is 40 years old and gets into trouble for rogue and vagabond. He serves time in the New House of Correction in Bedford County Jail. The next time James is in trouble is when he is 53 years old. This time it's for assault. He is sentenced to 21 days in the Bedford jail. On both occasions he is noted as being a good, orderly prisoner. On the 1841 census, living with his wife, Mary, and 4 of his children, he is an agricultural labourer. James ends his years by living with his daughter in Kempston. He is noted as being a Chelsea pensioner on the 1951 census. John Bellamy, born 1818. We don't have the same detailed records for our female ancestors, but what we do know about Anne Bottoms, who was born in 1813, was that she was a lace maker. There was once a number of lace making districts in England, but there were only a few of importance. Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire were the main lace making counties. This meant that instead of concentrating on making unfamiliar patterns, the lace maker could produce much more lace by working automatically on the design with which he was thoroughly familiar. It is hard to imagine lace makers sitting in the doorways of the cottages in Kempston. In order to get the best possible light, they sat outside when they could. On cold and wet days they would sit in windows. 3 or 4 lace makers would often congregate in a bay window for maximum light, often with a chaddy pot. This was similar to a warming pan filled with hot coals, tucked under their skirts for warmth. When it was dark, they sat around one candle surrounded by special glass reflectors called flashes on a wooden stand. These maximised the light and rush bags were attached to the stand to hold the flashes when not in use. Lace makers worked long tedious hours and often ended up with very poor eyesight as a result. At the Great Exhibition of 1851, Maltese lace was exhibited for the first time, now known as Bedfordshire lace. This was a more open lace, which lace makers liked as it was easier to work with its distinctive spider and leaf patterns. William Bellamy was born in October 1838 in Kempston. At the age of 12, William was working as an agricultural labourer in Kempston, along with his father and younger brother Joel, 9. By the age of 23, William was working as a railway labourer in Kempston. His work coincided with the final link from Bedford to Cambridge, opening on the 7th of July 1862. This provided an important cross-country line between Oxford and Cambridge. He married Lisa Walker on the 10th of September 1861 in his hometown of Kempston. However, like his granddad and uncles, William found himself in a little bit of trouble in the coming years. He was charged with poaching and assault and served time as a consequence. Could this be the reason why in 1870 William moved his wife and 5 children up north to County Durham, or was it purely for work-related reasons? When William moved to Frostley, he started working as a limestone quarryman at the local quarry. This would be a job that he would go on to stay at for the rest of his working life and would provide his family a stable income.
Limestone has been quarried from the valley sides around Frostley since the 12th century, but it was in the late 1800s that the village became an important centre for limestone quarrying. Limestone has many uses, as a roadstone, agricultural lime, for flux in the iron and steel industry, and for cement. Every day, hundreds of quarrymen would set off to work. Their jackets, waistcoats and trousers would be made of heavy moleskin or corduroy to keep the wind out. They wore a simple knotted neckerchief that was often useful as a bandage for slight injuries or for wiping sweat from their brow. In group photos they are often seen with a determined expression. They wore iron-shod clogs on their feet, and in their hands would be their brew can and food for the day. The men would heat their bait on a simple stove in one of the dry stone shelters they built near to their workplace. The men worked with hand tools in the open moorland with no safety equipment, using only hammers, picks, crowbars and sledgehammers, forcing the stone from the rock beds. Imagine the effort of swinging a large sledgehammer all day. It was often said that you would never see an overweight quarryman.
In William's personal life, it looked like there was some sad times regarding his children. Walter died aged 2, and they had a stillborn son 2 years later. Benjamin Robert Bellamy, born 1864. Benjamin Bellamy, born 1901. Eva Lambert, born 1903. They are living in Oliver's building on Sacriston Front Street. We can see Benjamin is a hauler above ground and Eva is a housewife. Work in coal mines was both hard and dangerous. Coal seams varied in thickness from 18 inches in Durham to about 7 feet in Yorkshire. Narrow seams meant the miners worked in very confined spaces. David Douglas pointed out, "The thin seams of Durham are a nightmare. Crawling down the seam, only inches would separate the roof from your prostrate body. Your head would be turned to the side, flat against the floor, with maybe a 2-inch space above before you made contact with the roof." Then I moved to coal mines. There we had low seams also, very low seams. There was no rails to draw upon, that is, tramways. We had leather belts for our shoulders. We had to keep dragging the coal with these ropes over our shoulders, sometimes round the middle with a chain between our legs. Then there was always another behind pushing with his head.
were chatting away, it was like an interval, and we were chatting away, then this woman that was sitting behind, facing me on the next table, and then we realised the bingo had started again. So, anyway, tell me, can you, she wanted a repeat of the first number, Then she even won the first line.